Today we're going to tackle a really interesting question. How do contraceptives actually work? But to really get how they work, first we need to understand how a pregnancy happens in the first place. Okay, so let's break down this incredible journey. For a pregnancy to happen, everything has to line up just right. First, sperm enters the vagina, and then it's a long swim up through the cervix, into the uterus, and finally into one of the fallopian tubes. Now, if an egg is there waiting, it only takes one single sperm to fertilize it. Which, of course, brings us to the big question. If that's the path, how do you put up a roadblock? How can this process be prevented? It might seem like there are a million different types of contraception out there, but what's really cool is that they almost all boil down to just 3 basic strategies. Thinking about it this way makes the whole thing a lot easier to get your head around. And here they are: block, disable, and suppress. That's it. So let's dive into each one of these master strategies and see exactly how they pull it off. First up, we've got strategy number 1, block the sperm. This is probably the most straightforward and, intuitive approach of the 3. And it is exactly what it sounds like. Blocking is all about creating a physical barrier. The goal is super simple. Just don't let the sperm get anywhere near the egg. So you've got a couple ways to do this. You've got things like male and female condoms, which stop sperm from even entering the vagina. And then you've got other devices like a diaphragm, a cervical cap, or a sponge, which are placed inside to basically put up a barricade right at the entrance of the uterus. Now, there is something really unique about condoms that's worth pointing out. Because they create that complete physical barrier, they are the only contraceptive method that also helps prevent the transmission of certain sexually transmitted infections. That's a huge benefit. All right, let's move on to our second strategy. This one is strategy number 2, disable the sperm. So instead of a physical approach, this one is all about chemistry. The disable strategy uses a chemical called a spermicide, and its job is kind of a 1-2 punch. First, it stops the sperm from being able to swim, and second, it actually destroys them. And spermicides are really versatile. They come in all sorts of forms: foams, jellies, even a thin film that dissolves. You can use them on their own, or for even better protection, you can combine them with a barrier method, like a diaphragm. And that brings us to our third and final strategy. This one is fascinating because it steps in way earlier in the whole process. It's all about suppressing the egg. So this strategy works by suppressing what's called ovulation. Basically, it uses hormones to send a message to the ovary saying, hey, let's not release an egg this month. Because if there's no egg in the fallopian tube to begin with, well, there's nothing for the sperm to fertilize. The most common methods that use this suppressed strategy are what we call hormonal contraceptives. And you've probably heard of a lot of these. The pill, the patch, the shot, the vaginal ring. They all work by releasing hormones to prevent that egg from being released. Now, here's where it gets really clever. It's not always just one strategy per method. Some of the more modern contraceptives are actually hybrids. Take IUDs, for example. A hormonal IUD can suppress ovulation, but it also thickens cervical mucus, which helps block sperm. And then copper IUDs don't use hormones at all. The copper itself acts like a spermicide, which disables the sperm. So you can see they're often mixing and matching these strategies. So there you have it: block, disable, and suppress. But that leads to the question, is one better than another? Well, to answer that, we have to talk about the difference between theory and reality, or what experts call perfect use versus typical use. Let's look at condoms. With perfect use, and that means using one correctly every single time, no mistakes, they're 98% effective. That means out of 100 couples using them perfectly for a year, only 2 might get pregnant. But life happens, right? In the real world, with typical use, that effectiveness actually drops to 82%. That is a pretty big difference. And we see a similar thing with hormonal methods. The pill or the patch with perfect use is 99% effective. But in reality, when someone misses a pill or is late putting on a patch, that typical use rate falls to 91%. And for spermicide, that gap between perfect and typical use is even wider. It starts at 85% effective with perfect use, but drops all the way down to 71% in the real world. This really shows you just how important it is to use any method correctly and consistently. And all of this brings us to what might be the most critical piece of the whole puzzle: the personal equation. Because choosing a method isn't just about the numbers on a chart. It's a balance of so many personal things. How convenient is it for your lifestyle?
What are the potential side effects? Things like headaches or high blood pressure, which, especially with hormonal methods, primarily affect women. And do you need a doctor's prescription to get it?
Ultimately, it really does all come down to this. There's no single best method that works for everybody. The choice is so personal, and what's right for you at one point in your life might not be the best choice later on. So, after all this, it makes you wonder, what's next? We've seen how much these methods have evolved, but what does the future hold for contraception? Well, the research definitely isn't stopping. Scientists are always exploring new options. One of the biggest things people talk about is a hormonal pill for men, which would work by suppressing sperm production. That would add a whole new dimension to these strategies, wouldn't it? It really makes you wonder what the next generation of contraception is going to look like.